So I want to give our next speaker a chance to get up and give us her conversation that she wants to have. If everybody would welcome to the stage Anitha.
Thank you, Jay. Okay, I guess I can see everyone here. I basically going to run through, I know our kind of schedule is all out, but essentially what I really want to bring as a point of view, because I think a lot of the crowd here sort of is already familiar with some part of crypto, blockchain, ICOs, working on projects, know about funding. But what I want to really provide is a completely different vantage point. It's a very different context is what I'm going to bring to the table as to why this should matter and where we're heading with it. So before I delve deep into that, my full name is Anitha Vadavatha. I'm the founder and founding partner of Decent Labs, D.Cent Labs. In short for Decentralized Technologies and AI and IoT. Essentially, it's an enterprise incubator fund. Also provide a sandbox for enterprises to really adopt what's happening here, not just the entrepreneurs through the ICO route. Because what we heard so far is a lot of the ICOs, individuals taking this technology, building something, and trying to transform. But industries and large enterprises have huge value in communities and societies, and they're always looking to transform into new business models. So part of the reason of my focus on that is, let's also give them a chance to really transform their own industries and their companies. So before I jump into my presentation, I just want to play a short clip. Would you mind playing this clip? I am associated with this project. If you can stop it for a second. I'm one of the co-executive producers of this film. I'm an alumni of Singularity University, which is at NASA Ames Research Park on the West Coast. And this is actually a documentary that we made on the university and why this thinking is relevant. But I just want to play something where all of these amazing individuals have something to say to us. So if you can play from the beginning, please.
Here's a quote. In the past century, there were more changes than in the previous 1,000 years.
The rate of change is explosive to the point that our ability to understand the implications of it is going to be out of our grasp very soon.
Our intuition about the future is linear, not exponential. It makes a huge difference.
The impact of these things is completely unpredictable.
We can't know what the future is going to be, but we can influence the future.
I had sort of a very simple metric now I use, which is, are you working on something that can change the world? Yes or no? The answer for 99.99999% of people in the world is no.
What if we created a university focused on the exponentially growing
Stop it,
technology?
please. Thank you. It's an important message. Of course, these are all great scientists, thinkers, futurists, you can name whatever. They're deeply engaged in looking at the world and trying to advance our world, our planet in a different direction. So if you can pull up my presentation, really there's one thing, if you caught it or not, they talked something about linear thinking. And essentially, we're all linear beings. We are conditioned to think linearly as human behaviors. So we live our life linearly. We grow up, go to school, go to college, date, get a child, whatever we have to do, we do. And then we also build our models, our enterprises, everything around this linear function. Our stock markets operate on a linear function, right? Because we look at year-on-year quarterly growth. We never say that, hey, I launched a company today, next year I'm going to grow 110,000%. We never do that kind of a growth curve. We only look at maybe 10% yield, 20% yield, 30% yield. It's always based on predictive models, which are linear models. So what's really important here is, if you can switch to the presentation, exponentiality. How many are even familiar with the concept of exponentiality or exponential curve? The Moore's law, right? So definitely, I think quite a few of us are. So I'm not going to delve too much into it. Essentially, I'm going to jump back into my presentation. Would you mind pulling up my presentation? So technically, if you think about why does it matter in a decentralized environment, I really think that the now and the next phase truly belongs to the decentralized. Okay, this isn't working. Oh. Can you click on later? Thank you. Good, everyone got a chance to look at the disclaimer. So next. Okay. This is a quote which is extremely, extremely important to grasp. Our entire future depends on this, right? The future will be far more surprising than most people realize because few observers have truly internalized the implications of the very fact that it's not things are changing. The acceleration itself is changing at an accelerated pace. So what we think today, what we plan for tomorrow, won't exist day after tomorrow. So that also can have implications on what we study today, what education we acquire, to everything else. But that's extremely important to keep in mind as we think about decentralization. Okay, okay. The fourth industrialization basically is changing today's business, government, and civic climate. This is a bold prediction and a projection, but there's a lot of data backing this prediction, right? In the next decade, 40% of S&P will be wiped out. So that's a pretty significant claim to make. Again, the reason, if you purely look at it from a linear functionality standpoint, this won't hold true. But if you actually take into account the exponential curves, this is very, very possible. It's already happening, right? So the speed of current technological breakthroughs is really what is the amplifying factor in this case. It's not that human beings are changing. It's not the systems are changing. It's not the business models are changing. The super convergence of all these technologies accelerating at the same time is actually what's going to lead some of this change. So, of course, we talked about AI. You know, we had a great presentation earlier. But you throw into that bucket nanotechnology, robotics, digital biology, not our physical biology, which is extremely important, right? When you say digital biology, we also have to think about synthetic biology. I can not just read, write. If I can start writing, my body becomes another robotic mechanism. But that's unprecedented. So the technological, environmental, and political changes will basically have an implication on any business that you're going to build or any business you actually within operate. But the main question is, how do you prepare for this? How do you prepare for a world that's going to be different? We can't imagine. We can gamify a lot of that, I'm sure. But simulation is a huge power to actually get into some of the scenarios. But it's going to happen way faster than we actually even predicted. So understanding and internalizing the growth cycle of digital technology is actually very important. And that's actually deeply connected to decentralization. Because decentralization, blockchain doesn't exist if you don't have digital. Data is pretty much the reason why we're able to use blockchain. So if there's no data, there's no blockchain as a technology. Okay. Okay, I think we kind of talked about it. So essentially, we're talking about AI. AI is also going to be pretty significant. It's going to shape everything that we do, the way we live, learn, move, work, build, die, right? Basically, this is an interesting kind of a graph to understand. We operate at human intelligence level. We reward human intelligence. We build systems for human intelligence. We create incentive structures. Again, incentives are very critical because they apply to also the decentralized mechanisms and blockchain technologies. Token is nothing but an incentive. It's a huge incentive as to why you're tokenizing everything. But we are also at the same time dealing with artificial intelligence. Whatever level of intelligence we have, but that's already existing today, in some cases already disrupting some industries. But really where the next wave is going to come is the augmentation of human intelligence. So if I say I have an IQ of, say, 120, I can augment to 220, right? So it's not what I'm born with, but what I can add to it. And can I truly leverage some of these technologies to augment myself? Again, whether I internally do an implant or use an external device through which I can actually operate, it's the augmentation really is where the real power is going to come from. Of course, we can talk about AGI, which is a completely different realm. That's where you must have all seen, like from Stephen Hawking to everyone said that, oh my God, we better be scared up for our species, we're going to die. Simple examples, right? Again, imagination is something humans are very, very good at. So we pride ourselves in actually being the creators, music, screenplay, writing, games. But today, we already have examples, not the best versions, but actually proven examples, demonstrated examples of what AI could actually achieve. We have an entire album that was composed by an AI without human intervention that already exists, actually driven by Sony, as a company that's very interested in. If you think about a screenplay, horrible sci-fi screenplay, but the fact is the entire screenplay was written by a machine. No human has written a screenplay, which actually got produced into a short film called Sunspring. There was actually a novel, a debut novel that won one of the top awards in Japan. The entire novel was written for the first time by AI machine. And of course, you're all familiar with AlphaGo, right? It's going to beat the best Go player in the world. Sorry, could you please click on the later? So essentially what we're trying to say is we humans think that we are so good that the machines can never take over our creativity, but we already have examples of creation. That is also where we are beginning to integrate or leverage rather technologies to help us create things better. Okay, there is. Next slide, please. Could you actually do that? This is faster. So what we need to really understand in this context, this is where also decentralized technology and blockchain becomes really critical, is in this context of it is not pure software, it is not pure hardware, it's software hardware, right? So when I'm actually talking about digital assets, data, once I start getting into creating an identity as a use case for blockchain, I can have an identity for everything. A data point can be a digital asset, so is actually a physical object. So once I have this IoT environment combining with my digital environment, and on that context, if I want to decentralize, how I'm going to do it? It's really important to understand because we're not going to operate in silos. We're not going to build systems in standalone systems. It has to integrate with the way we're actually going to go. Next slide, please. Next slide. Think about future of work. Again, we're all talking about building new business models. Someone has to pay for it. Are we going to get a salary? Are we building companies? So what does building companies mean? Because so far when we think about building companies, we're always looking to hire talent, right? That's going to produce services or products. So in the case of automation, where we're actually automating everything, we are trying to diminish the very role of humans because if they can do something better, why should we do it? We would rather do things we're actually really good at, right? Then how does the future of work actually happen? In that context, how do we build these new business models leveraging decentralized technologies or AI or in combination? We also have to be very aware of the fact that it's not just building another blockchain company. What does it mean? How does this company look like? How does this organization look like, right? Next slide. Most important thing is actually this. All of those are just a little bit of a context as to where humans are heading. Edelman is like a pretty well-known agency that actually publishes great research and reports. This is their latest report that they published, came out in January 2018, on where trust is in the world, right? So the most important part here is 2005. So essentially, we all operate with the fundamental goal of trusting something. Either trust my friends and family, or trust a system, trust governments, or trust media, trust organizations. Without trust, we can't operate. It's just impossible for human psyche. So from that standpoint, if you actually look from 2001 onwards to 2018, there's a major shift in where trust is moving in a systemic way. In 2001, there was a rise in influence of NGOs. People started trusting anything that was a non-governmental organization because they felt that they're good, right? But if you go to 2005, that is the first shift towards this concept of peer-to-peer from a trust layer standpoint, right? The trust actually went from authorities to peers, shifted in 2005. And it started developing from there onwards, which is really fascinating. And when you think about peer-to-peer, blockchain is about a peer-to-peer environment, right? We are all kind of relying on each other. We're eliminating middlemen. That means we don't trust any other entity but my peers. Same equal footing. But of course, 2018, when you look at the trust, we are in the worst condition in the world when it comes to trusting anything. We don't trust media, we don't trust political systems, we don't trust people, we don't even trust our families. So trust is a major erosion worldwide. So basically, what's really on the decline is trust. Next slide, please. So essentially, when you think about polarization of trust, why do you think blockchain is gaining so much movement? Why do you think people care about blockchain? It's like any other technology. Why is such a worldwide phenomena? Because of this. Somehow, blockchain is beginning to show that, hey, we can bring back some of that trust by eliminating any third-party verifier or an intermediary. But instead of you relying on another human through a codified mechanism, I can now increase transparency. When you have increased transparency, I can trust again, right? So it's almost kind of seen as like a little bit of a mantra. And what's really fascinating on this chart really is if you look at the green side of it, unusual, it's non-intuitive. US, I always thought is like the country I would totally trust. The worst decline in trust losses in the world is US. It's at the bottom completely. But which is the top? China. Completely non-intuitive, right? I mean, like, I would not think, why would I trust? Why is there a trust gain in Chinese government? It's fascinating. Again, there could be other variables, it could be subjective and skewed, but it's a really fascinating curve to understand. But most importantly in this context is, when we think about decentralized technologies, when we think about blockchain, when we think about these and building these models, what we're really bringing back is trust. So if you're not doing it for trust, it is allowing us to bring back trust in ways that we were not able to before. So in a systemic way. Next slide, please. So essentially, again, what it really predictive of that is, we're going from the centralized environments to distributed and decentralized. So the movement right now is because of that. The only way you can do it is actually if you go from the single point of failure to basically creating much more of a tamper-proof environment through a smart contract mechanism. Next slide. So, of course, we all know that decentralization is not a new idea. Since humans existed, we always talked about decentralization. Like if you actually think about, guilty of using BitTorrent for my music. Again, through software, we've actually done that before through a peer-to-peer mechanism. So the peer-to-peer networks is not new. Protocols are not new. But the way we're able to create through smart contract is new, which is why blockchain has actually come back as this really interesting protocol layer on which we can actually build a lot of things. Next slide. There are 3 reasons why we think this is useful to us in the first place, right? One is fault tolerance. Second is attack resistance. Third is collusion resistance. So what blockchain provides is these 3 things. Next slide. So technically, what are we talking about? What is exactly fault tolerance, right? Essentially, decentralized systems are less likely to fail accidentally. It's really important when you're trying to create a system that you can't have random failures. You want it to be actually predictive, because they also rely on different components. Attack resistance. Again, we've seen Equifax, we've seen Target, we've seen many, many cases of major hacks and everything got compromised. We cannot afford that. I mean, in the Equifax case, 140 million accounts got compromised. This is our extreme personal financial data. That means basically every taxpayer in this country, their data got compromised. One hack, right? We cannot afford to have systems, again, being built in that mechanisms where it has to be some element of tamper-proof. You cannot tamper data. It's very important to actually have that. Next slide. Milton Friedman in 1999 actually said this, which is amazing, right? Again, internet is also a protocol. Blockchain technology is also a protocol. So protocols are not new. Protocols are amazing because they become the plumbing on which we actually build applications, right? He actually said that I think that the internet is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash cryptocurrency. This was 1999, right? A method whereby on the internet you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A. That's the anonymity that blockchain actually provides, right? Because I can now actually do the transaction, but I can have my key anonymized. All you would see is my key and not my identity. Pseudo-private. There are many ways you can actually make it private, not private. So the immutability is actually really important. Next slide. So essentially, if we want to decentralize, we need this underlying architecture of blockchain. Next slide. Again, there are a lot of jargon and words that get thrown around. Everyone's calling blockchain the Web 3.0. It's like, hey, this is the next version, this evolution of internet. But essentially, what does it mean in the practical context, right? When we had internet, we started building applications for various kind of utilities, right? So when you actually think about Web 2.0 apps, we had Chrome, Dropbox, Skype, Google, Facebook, WhatsApp, bunch of applications where we actually did some things that actually provided value. We could not have built that if we didn't have internet. So this is actually going to provide, there's going to be a major resurgence or emergence of dApps. So just like we actually build all of these different applications, on blockchain, we're going to build a lot of decentralized applications. Because now we have this other protocol layer, we can build any kind of applications that we want. We can actually go build a version of the Facebook, which is decentralized. We can go build a version of search engine, which is actually decentralized. We can go build a version of Messenger, which is decentralized, or anything else, right? So essentially, that's important. So where we see a lot of interesting growth is going to come is all of the things that everyone's actually talking about in their ICOs, they're trying to essentially build some sort of a decentralized application. They're building products. But if you don't have that blockchain technology, you can't build that, right? So we're going to see a major wave of that. Next slide. I think we've already covered, so let's move to the next slide. Cryptocurrency, of course, all the great speakers earlier today covered so much in depth about cryptocurrency. But let's go put this into the context. The first successful use case, accidentally or not accidentally, happened to be creating a cryptocurrency using blockchain technology. So you have to understand the relevancy of the technology is far greater than cryptocurrency. But because cryptocurrency became such a revolutionary alternate payment mechanism that first time exhibited attributes not just as a payment mechanism. It became like an asset class. It grew in value. I just held it and used it as an incentive. It's like it's 5 things rolled into one. Interesting behavior, which is why regulators are struggling to figure out where does it fit. Because they have regulations around if it's payment mechanism, they know exactly how to regulate it. But if that payment mechanism becomes something that grows in value like stock, how do you regulate that? And roll into that, I can also use it as a token mechanism, as an incentive. How do you regulate that? Because gaming has always used tokens all the time. They never regulated that. They're behaving exactly the same way. So I can use the same cryptocurrency, throw into different contexts, also use it all at once, right? So which is where there's a lot of the laws don't exist, and we're beginning to figure out where do we fit this based on which country, where it's going to go, right? But that's a revolutionary use case. I don't think it was really intended. That's my take. I could be wrong. Next slide. There was this one guy I was following on Twitter. He doesn't have too many followers, but his statement I thought was amazing. He said, people arguing whether Bitcoin is gold or a payment protocol have entirely missed the point of a global system of record. So basically, that's really what it is. If there's no system of record, again, data, you have to go back to understanding data. You have to go back to understand what digital assets mean in that context, right? The point isn't to use the global SOR for payments or simply to store your wealth on it. It is a protocol for finality without trusting a central authority. Powerful. Next slide. Again, this is just a context of market cap, right? So JP Morgan Chase, I don't know how recent this data is, but the entire crypto market is as big as JP Morgan Chase. But if you think about how long did it take to build JP Morgan Chase for it to achieve that level of market cap, and how long Bitcoin is, the whole crypto market existed. Amazing. This is the exponential curve we're talking about. Bank of China is as big as Bitcoin alone as a single cryptocurrency in value. Goldman Sachs and the rest of the other coins, right? Morgan Stanley is as big as Ethereum. So you're talking about these banking institutions which have been built over a period of time, driving value. Same market cap, less than 5 years. Next slide. Of course, the same another perspective we're talking about is, if you look at all money in the world, that's $83.6 trillion. If you look at Bitcoin, that's 41 billion, one singular cryptocurrency. Next slide. Again, there's another projection. The most interesting thing, we don't know what is driving these projections, right? They're estimating that the entire crypto capitalization is going to be $5 trillion by 2025, which is why everyone wants to be in this. How? We don't know. We're figuring it out. But there's something real here. I don't think the reality is not just because of cryptocurrency. It's the technology and what it can actually do. Right? We never want to lose sight of what is powering all of this, the technology. Next slide. Again, Ethereum, 100%. I don't think anything gives us that much return in a year. So clearly, it's changing a lot. Next slide. So essentially, future is protocols, not companies, right? So if you're actually building all of these business use cases based on protocols, internet being TCP/IP a protocol, now new protocols are emerging. Really, what does a company look like? What does an organization look like? What does a government look like? How do you even govern? You can govern, but what does government mean? Like you can have an organization, but what does organization truly mean? If it is codified, and I bring in automation in this and put some AI layer, DAO is a classic example. Of course, it got hacked and in a lot of interesting things, but that is still by far the best use case I would always like to talk about is, it was too early, but it's coming. There's no way it's not going to happen, right? Because imagine, you raised $100 million in real money. No human has to manage that process as a fund manager. That's pretty freaking awesome, right? Of course, it got hacked right away. The security is a whole other layer of conversation. I'm not an expert at that, so I won't even comment on it. But the fact is we were able to do that and demonstrate even a failed model. That means if you were to fix it, if you were to figure out a way, is it far from truth? Maybe not, right? So what does in that context mean building companies, right? Next slide. So essentially, we've always heard about using public blockchain, private blockchain, enterprise blockchain. Really, the 5 key things is what everyone's deciding on, right? How you want to do it around a community, what kind of consensus you want to actually build. Access, speed, security, identity, and assets are your 5 key ingredients based on which either you want to decide to go on the public, and what happens if you do that? If you go on the private, what happens there? But the consensus protocol still remains. But also remember, the Bitcoin blockchain is a proof of work trust model. And then Ethereum is a proof of work trust model. But because of smart contract creation, I can do both public and private chains. But then you remove the blockchain concept going to Hashgraph. There's no blockchains. There are no blocks, there are no chains, but you can still tokenize. So 2 concepts we have to understand. It's not about what trust model you apply. Do I want to tokenize? If I want to tokenize, what do I want to tokenize? What is the best use case for me to use it? Is Ethereum the answer for everything? Not necessarily. Is Hashgraph the answer for everything? No. There's Stellar, there's Litecoin, there's Ripple. There are many protocols that exist that we can actually leverage. And some are not blockchains, right? That's not at all. Next slide. Again, this is just to give, since I'm focused on industry and enterprises, I'm very keen to know who's doing, where are the applications, right? So this is in 2017, 58% of that sector is actually looking at applying this technology some form or another, like consumer products and manufacturing, life sciences and healthcare, tech, media and telecommunications, financial services. So essentially, everywhere people are exploring this. Are they far ahead? No, they're all in the proof of concept phase. So we really don't have successful use cases yet. But the fact is, we are willing to go all the way and take the chance. Next slide. Internet of blockchains. If you look at, there are so many use cases. There's no one use case. There are hundreds of use cases. Retail and entertainment, organizational, financial, technical, personal, Netflix. You can take anything and you can decentralize to some degree. So if you just literally take, you don't even have to consult anyone. Say, hey, what do I want to do? Look at all the apps that exist on the internet. Can you do a decentralized version of that? That's already a use case, right? So essentially, and that's increasing. This is like only few. You see a major, major, major volume that's going to increase. Next slide. Next slide. Again, this is the top 25 notable cryptocurrencies. We've already covered it. Next slide. Again, if you think about startups, right? Millions of dollars are going into this new, any company that is saying, any startup that's actually saying that, hey, I'm going to use blockchain and solve this problem, right? So they're all from P2P marketplaces to P2P lending, mining, wallets and money services, trading and exchanges, capital markets and financial, storing, security and regulatory, enterprise services and currencies, social and browsers. You name it, people or entrepreneurs are already working on building startups. And these are all very well-funded startups, both from equity and also from ICOs. They're not all 100% ICO startups, by the way. They're applying the technology. Next slide. This is really important, actually. There's no data here. But all of this great story, we're literally hanging by the cliff. Everything can vaporize overnight because still not backed solidly by anything that we fully understand globally. It's a speculatory market, but we believe in the technology, which is what actually driving a lot of it. And the rich people are also helping to drive it even more, right? But too early. This is like the 1994 of what internet was, is where we are in this space. So a lot's going to come around this. Next slide. Again, some of the things I just want to kind of throw in that you want to remember is, anytime you're looking at an ICO or looking at, doing something, you want to understand who the backers are. What is their consensus mechanism, right? What is the divisibility, which is really important because that will let you determine, I'm going to use Ethereum or something else. But what's really fueling the blockchain is also equally important. Language. Do you need a special language to code that? Or is it compatible with existing programming languages? What direction is it actually going? Does it have international audience? Because that changes your entire regulatory scheme, right? Speed, last one is the most important. Blockchain can completely die if quantum computing comes. That's going to come. So right now, we're actually already focused on having chains that could be quantum computer proof. Because we don't need blockchains if you have quantum computing. And that's already there, right? So it's really important to know that when you choose to build something that you're going to build, whether it's an enterprise or any other place, you better know how long you want the system to last. But you're going to use something that's not quantum proof, it's going to be obsolete, right? Because completely, again, who needs speed? Like all of the use case actually goes out of the window. Next slide. I want to give like one or two examples, and I'm going to wrap it up quickly. Government. Again, it's all about removing government. But who's pushing blockchain the most? Governments. And I'll give you an example. So the major rise of blockchain adoption by governments across the world. Dubai has already done that. Zug, which is like everyone knows the crypto valley with Switzerland, it's the government that's driving it, right? If you actually go to some of the African countries, government's driving it. So yeah, we hear all about the entrepreneurs trying to do it, but the major drivers actually pushing this technology forward is actually governments, which is really fascinating. But of course, they're not doing 100% public chain. They're clearly going the compliant way and then trying to control because they want control. Next slide. Again, these are just some of the things, right? Next slide. This is a state, this is India, it's a map of India, and the red part is the state where I originally came from. So that state got actually split into two states because of political reasons, and both states right now, the governments have major initiatives to actually bring blockchain to the governance layer. So there's some of the use cases they're actually already working on is in the diagnostic services on the healthcare side. They're actually looking at genetic data. They're not just looking at whether your hospital data. They're looking at, hey, if because genome sequence is going to be so cheap, that's actually, again, it goes back to data, right? They want to put all of that on the chain. They're already working with some really, really smart people behind the scenes who are actually helping them define some of this. Land records. 66% of all civil cases in India are land disputes. Major corruption. A piece of land gets sold like 50 times in India. So it's impossible to actually manage if you're a landowner. So the only way they want to do is they want to bring this transparency so that way there's no duplication of the record. So they're already working on a project right now, which is slightly beyond proof of concept phase, is putting all land records, basically from cyber attack standpoint, because again, it's a little bit security layer. Civil supply is another one. They're actually looking at transport, tracking everything, right? So they're also looking at that, like how can you streamline titles of all the vehicles? Can we put that on the chain? Protect data of subsidies from cyber attacks on the subsidies, because India gives a lot of subsidies to a lot of companies and institutes, so they want to be able to track that better. So both the states, that entire red part is already doing at least like about a dozen projects right now in the pipeline, proof of concept working on these. Next slide. And they're actually taking a collaboration approach. Consensus is actually part of them, helping them. KPMG is on board helping them. There's a Malaysian company, Hitachi is already actually on the table, helping them build this stuff. Covalent is another fund, which is actually what they're trying to do in India is they're trying to build something called a blockchain stack, right? India does everything like a stack. They have all these cool words like you have the digital stack, the manufacturing stack. So they're actually trying to build this blockchain stack, which can be easy drag and drop for anything they want, so they can roll it out across the governments. So again, this is only for government administration side, but the fact is they're not trying to solve themselves. They're actually trying to bring the best players in the world who already have either a technology they can leverage or partner who can help them do it. Next slide. Again, essentially, if you look at a couple of the reasons why they're trying to do that, right? They want to increase efficiency. They want to deal with land fraudsters. That's the biggest use cases right now. Next slide. AI and blockchain is actually very, very important. Whether people do blockchain or not, they're doing AI anyway. There's no turning back from AI. Automation is already happening, right? So JP Morgan Chase actually created because they have a $9.5 billion internal budget. They're basically a technology company at this point. They're trying to be a technology company. And they created for the contract law alone because they said, you know what, it takes too long. We pay a lot of money to a lot of the lawyers, and it takes about a year for the number of contract laws that have to be reviewed. So they in-house created a software called, an AI-layered software called Coin that basically ended up replacing for the company certain parts of contract law that equated to 360,000 hours of lawyers' work. It does under 60 seconds today. Except anomalies are actually reviewed by humans. For the rest, basically, they don't need lawyers for that anymore. So the blue-collar work is actually may stay a little longer. The white-collar will be first out of the window when it comes to automation. Because anything analytics, you can actually do automate and do predictive models. So in that context, how do we leverage? Because if you're now building a decentralized mechanism or using blockchain, don't lose sight of the fact that you still have to automate a lot of things. So what it basically can provide you for you is the data, the quality of data that you put into smart contract really matters. So before you put the data into smart contract, you can leverage AI to actually do better predictive models of every other data, right? Because again, it's tamper-proof. You don't want to touch that. Whatever proof of stake, proof of work, whatever method you use, it's really important. So you have to understand integration is really important. Just doing anything standalone is going to be obsolete pretty much soon. So there's no point trying to do that. Next slide. Again, this is an example of a company, Numerai, which basically tried to leverage both AI and blockchain for a hedge fund. Next slide. So it's a cryptographic token on Ethereum blockchain, powered AI coordinated hedge fund. We're now beginning to get into the little bit of the DAO model here, which is really interesting, right? And their advances are amazing. Like again, these are the kind of, again, whether they do a tokenization, ICO, doesn't matter. These are real use cases. Like this is not just raising money for the sake of raising money, but how are you applying tokenization? How are you bringing those data scientists to actually reward them so they can build and manage this? Next slide. Again, this kind of goes into details about the same use case. Next slide. So basically, they were looking at, just to kind of give you a glimpse of, they were looking at training data, competition data, example models, and example predictions. So that's some of the layers of AI, but then all of that actually gets codified through the blockchain smart contract because they use Ethereum here. So it's clearly proof of work mechanism. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So essentially, this is just a little bit about my company, where we focus on learning and enterprise. I think enterprise is going to be a really important environment because whatever you build today will also be an enterprise. It doesn't matter. You take an existing one or you take one that actually building, it's a phase of a life of a company. But the question is, what is this new business model? How can you leverage that? And if you already have a domain expertise on leverage point, why wouldn't you use it, right? Why do you have to start from scratch and collecting data when I'm already sitting on loads of data that can convert into and create a new business model where everyone can benefit and you pass on the gains? Next slide. Again, this is some of my advisors and founders who include some of the top token economists to former city councilmen to corporate board advisors to people who manage Aerosmiths of the world. But essentially, the idea really here is, hey, it's agnostic to industry, it's a horizontal technology, and it's going to be an integrative technology as well. So it doesn't matter where you apply, how you apply, but I think the future really is about how can we leverage these protocol-based approaches, but integrate with the IoT hardware, software environment, add a layer of automation is actually really key. So thank you.
Any quick questions? A lot of conversation there, I think. Contacting you, I know you got to get on a flight and probably won't have a chance to interact with everybody tonight.
So I had a slide. Would you pull that deck up? Could you bring the presentation? Next slide. Again, would you build something to replace yourself? If you're building something that's not going to replace you, you shouldn't be building today. That's my take. Next slide. The question really is, do anything anywhere. Decentralization allows you to do that. You don't have to be in one place, right? But also you can talk to my avatar. I think that's like totally your territory. Next slide. That's my contact information. So it's anitha@decentlabs.com, and that's my cell phone number. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and you were going to stay for the race, but there's investors who need to meet with her in San Francisco, so she's got to jump on a plane.